2-week teaching series called Upside Down. In it, we're going to be looking at some different teachings of Jesus that kind of turn things upside down. Because one of the things that Jesus had the ability to do, he had the ability to take some things that had been taught before, he had some things that had been taught by various rabbis and various religious teachers, and he had a way of saying them a little bit differently. He had a way of saying them in a way that kind of turned things upside down. So we're going to be doing that here for the next 2 weeks, and then after that, we're going to be beginning a series on prayer. As I talked about a little bit earlier, we want prayer to be something that we're really going to focus in on this year as a church. So we're going to be doing a 6-week series on prayer. The first 3, we're going to cover some different parts of the Lord's Prayer that you can find in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Luke. And then after that, 3 weeks kind of summary of the Lord's Prayer. We're going to do 3 weeks on dangerous prayers. Those prayers that we find ourselves praying sometime that really then open up the door for God to show up and do some significant things. So in that sense, they're dangerous because we're really inviting God to come and to do something big, to do something significant, to do something new in our lives. So we're going to spend 6 weeks kind of covering the topic of prayer before we begin our journey towards Easter. So we just really want to encourage you just to come to join us through these different series. If you have a friend, if you have a family member that you think might connect to and value somewhat we're going to talk, please invite them to come with you. We want this to be as helpful to you in your walk with Christ. We want this to be helpful to you in terms of exploring who God is and who Jesus can be in your life. We hope that as you do that, you're going to be encouraged, you're going to be blessed, that you also grow in your faith. But would you just join me in a word of prayer as we get started with this series this morning? God, this is your word. So God, may your word bear fruit this morning, God. May your word be heard. May your name be lifted up. May we be encouraged. May we be challenged. And God, may we hear your voice speaking through your word here today. We just praise in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. So as I mentioned, Jesus had a way of turning things upside down. Jesus has a way of doing that, doesn't he? That not just in his teachings, but in our relationship with God. There's just sometimes where God does something that kind of turns our life upside down. We read something in our Bible, we hear something in prayer, through a conversation we have with somebody, we find our life gets turned upside down. And if you think about it, that's kind of how life goes sometimes, right? As we look ahead to the year 2020, maybe as we look back on the year 2019, you can maybe identify some things that happened in your life over the past year, or maybe as we would look back over 2020 as we go through this year, that you find turned your life upside down. Sometimes those are really good things, some things that happen that bring joy to our lives, and we find that our life will never, ever be the same. But on the other hand, it can be something that causes grief, or causes pain, or causes heartache, and then too we realize that our life may not ever feel like it's the same again because of what happened that flipped our life upside down. Well, in Jesus' ministry, he had a way of saying some things that not only got people's attention, but flipped some things upside down. So this week, we're going to be looking at one of those stories, one of those parables that Jesus taught, one of those things that he said that did this. It kind of took what we would understand, it took what we would know, it took what we would expect, and it flips it upside down. And it's found in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 20. I just want to encourage you to follow along with us as we read what Jesus has to say from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 20 this morning. It says this: "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning he went out, saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went out. He went out again around noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, 'Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?' 'Because no one has hired us,' they answered. He said to them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first.' The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. 'These who were hired last worked only 1 hour,' they said, 'and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them, 'I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have a right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. And it's really that last phrase that we're going to kind of focus on today. So the last will be first, and the first will be last, because that was really the phrase that kind of flipped this whole thing upside down. It's really that phrase that really kind of turns things around and challenges our perspective and challenges our understanding. So I want to kind of go back and I want to kind of walk you through the story again to kind of help you hear and experience what might have been going on, not only with the workers that we hear here in the story, but with those who would have been hearing this parable. So it starts off in a very, very normal way. The way that workers were hired in those days, especially for day laborers, because that's who these employees were. They were day laborers. They were not contracted permanent employees. They were day laborers that would be hired out to go and to do a work in a field or a vineyard or some other place. And what would happen is they would gather in the central marketplace. They would go and they would stand there, and then they would wait for somebody to come and to hire them to go out and to work for the day. So you need to picture all these different workers who are gathered there in this common square, in this common marketplace, and various owners would come in and say, "I need 5 workers, I need 10, I need 20, I need 2. Whoever they would need, and they would say, "All right, I'll take you and you and you. You come with me and you and you." And they would hire the workers they felt they needed for the day, and then they would send them out to work. And the denarius that we see there as their pay, that was the standard daily wage for a worker. So you can translate that however you want in today's money, but just understand that it was the fair going wage for a day's work for a day laborer who is going to be going out to work in a vineyard or a field or some other occupation like that. And the owner continues to hire throughout the day. This also was not uncommon. They may kind of observe how things are going. And you know how this goes, right? You're kind of watching how the progress is going in your field. It may be a busy season. There may be a lot of things that are ready to be harvested. And you think, you know what? I need more help. We're not making enough progress. We're not going quickly enough. We're not getting as much done as I hope to get done. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to hire more people. So the owner goes back to that same marketplace, to that same square, and he hires more people at 9 a.m. And then again at noon, then again at 3, and then again at 5. But the only thing that we see differently is that instead of telling them he's going to pay them a denarius, he simply says, "I'm going to pay you whatever is right." And again, this would have been common. This would have been what was expected because they understood we're not working a full day. We're either working 3 hours less or 6 hours less, 9 hours less, whatever the case may be. They understood we're not working the full day. So then this owner, whoever's responsible for the work and for the employee, they'll pay me whatever seems fair, whatever seems right. So the understanding would have been whatever portion of this money seems appropriate. So you could prorate it. You could do whatever you want to do. You could say, all right, you hired me at this portion of the day, so I get 3/4 of the pay, or you get half pay, or you get a quarter pay, whatever. That's would have been what was expected. But everything then changes at the end of the day. See, if you read the story, you understand at the end of the day, what happened was he goes to the foreman and says, all right, it's time to settle up. It's time to pay our help. It's time to pay our day laborers. So go ahead and bring them in, and I want you to start with those who were hired last first. So the people who were hired at 5 o'clock, workday ended at 6. They had worked for an hour. They come up, and they're expecting, all right, I'm going to get a 12th of whatever the day wage may have been, so whatever amount of money that would have been. But instead what happens is they find themselves receiving the full day's wage. So imagine for a second how you would have felt. You work for an hour. You show up at 5. You're done at 6. And your boss comes to you and said, here you go, full day's pay. How many would be excited about that? I better see every hand because you know you would be. Come on now. You know, it's like, man, this is great. This is amazing. What a blessing that I got a full day's pay for doing an hour's work. And then you see kind of so on and so forth, those who were hired at 3 or at noon or at 9, they also get paid a full day's wage. Now, put yourself in the mindset of the people who were hired first, who worked all day, who worked a 12-hour day. They're out there all day long. They do the work. They're thinking, man, this is looking pretty good for us, right? That guy, that girl over there who worked an hour, they got the full day's pay. Man, what are we going to get? This is going to be good. Are we going to get time and a half, double time? Sounds pretty good. And they get up there to receive their pay at the end of the day, and they find themselves getting paid exactly what they've been promised at the beginning of the day, a denarius. And they get mad. Now, I'm going to ask you again, now be honest with me, how many of you would have been frustrated? Yep, I thought so. I would too. It's like, wait a second. Joe over here, he worked for an hour. I was out there all day long. Did you see how much work I did? You know how hot it was today? He was taking a nap during that. I was out there working. How is this fair? And that's the tension in this parable. There's this tension that exists between the generosity that was shown to those who came last and then the experience of those who worked first, between those who worked all day long and those who only worked a portion of the day. And we find this happen, right? We all have our stories of when we maybe felt that we weren't treated fairly by an employer, by a boss. We can all have experiences if you are one who is in charge of employees, when employees come to you about something that they maybe felt wasn't fair or just or right. Because there's this tension that exists within the story between the different participants in the story of what they experienced. But then we see this phrase at the end that frames the whole story and so it turns it upside down when Jesus says, so the last will be first and the first will be last. And I want to kind of unpack for you why that phrase is significant, what it means in the context of the story. Because in this particular story, what we're looking at is an economy of grace and not an economy of merit or value. Because the owner is operating with a different grid. He's operating with a different frame. He's operating in a grace-based economy and not a merit-based economy. But all that we're used to is a merit or value-based economy. We assign a value or a price to something or a value to something of how we perceive something's value or significance, and then that determines what the going rate is. So, for example, an average doctor is always going to be paid more than an average bus driver because we have assigned a value to the profession of a doctor and we've assigned a value to the profession of a bus driver. Not that one's good and one's not good, but we assign this one is more valuable than that one. We do the same thing with products. You will always pay more for a car than you do a bag of apples. Both are good. Now, we need apples, we need food to eat, but you're not going to buy a car for the same price you would a bag of apples because we've determined in our economy that a car is worth more than this is. It can be because of the cost of production. It can be the cost of all kinds of things, all kinds of factors that go into it. But what I want you to hear is that it's all merit or value based. We assign a value to it. We assign a way that we see it, and all that shapes then how we react to it. So we know that the standard employee rate, the standard hourly wage is going to be this. We determine that this is the fair value for a day's work, just like they did then. But that's not how this owner operates. He operates differently. He operates based on grace. He operates out of his heart. He operates out of his goodness. And the thing is, that can then really shape and challenge how we see things. That's where we get this whole feeling of things maybe not being fair or things not being just or things not being right. Because it just doesn't seem to add up. Because we want things to operate in the way that we see them to be. We want them to operate in the way that we understand them to be, but things don't always go like that. And sometimes it's because somebody chooses to be generous, and sometimes it's for other reasons. So my first job after college was working at a place in Grand Rapids where we provided care for teenagers with behavior and emotional disorders. And I was hired as a part-time employee. So when I say part-time employee, what I want you to hear is that I was working 40 hours a week, but I did not get full-time benefits. There was no insurance. There was nothing else like that. But I would pick up enough shifts because they needed enough help that I would still work 40 hours a week. I just wouldn't get the benefits of being full-time. And that was just common in this particular place of employment. So I worked there for a while. And kind of the standard way it went was when a full-time position opened up, whoever had the most seniority as a part-time employee would get kind of first opportunity for that full-time position just to get the added benefits that came along with it, insurance and other items. So one of those positions opened up about a month after I started. And I talked to them about it, and that position went to a guy who was literally hired 2 weeks before me. It's like, well, that makes sense. He was hired 2 weeks before me, so it makes sense that he would be hired over me, even though we've been here pretty close to the same amount of time. Well, then fast forward about 4 months, and another one opens up. I had been there, I had been working, and I was even doing extra things because there was a staff meeting on Thursday mornings. It was at 7 a.m., and full-time employees were required to go. Part-time employees were invited to go but not required to go. I chose to go. Like, I'm going to go, I'm going to participate in these things because that might help me down the road either understand the business a little bit more, understand the organization a little bit more, and it might help me when that next full-time position opens up. So when it opens up, and of course I went down and I interviewed for it, but there was one thing that had changed in that time. I did not study theology or the Bible for my major when I was in college. I studied psychology. And this was a business, it was a place that was based in that. But in that time, I began to feel this call that God might be calling me to be a pastor. So I began to look into seminary and those kinds of things. And this organization I worked for was it was a Christian organization. It was a Christ-based Christian organization. So I'm sitting in my interview, and the boss asked me, it's like, we typically ask for a minimum of a 1-year commitment for people who are going to begin a full-time position. Is that going to be a problem? I said, well, I got to be honest with you. Right now, I'm feeling like God might be calling me to go to seminary. He might be calling me to pursue ministry. And if so, I would need to be in school in about September. So I can give you 9 months. I can't in good faith tell you that I can for sure give you a year. Because I thought, I have to be honest with them. This is what I'm feeling. It's a Christian organization. They should understand that. So fast forward a couple weeks, sitting at that Thursday morning staff meeting, and the boss is kind of going through different items on the agenda, and he gets to new full-time employee. I thought, that's interesting that's on the agenda because I haven't heard anything about that. And we get through there, and they say, yeah, and we want to say that so-and-so is being hired as our newest full-time employee. Want to guess whose name he didn't say? Mine. So I'm saying, well, this is awkward, because everyone's looking at me like, what? I'm like, I didn't know. I went up to the boss after, it's like, hey, I didn't know you were going to say that this morning. It was a little bit awkward. He's like, oh, well, HR should have called you. Yeah, but they're not in the meeting with me. You are. And then you want to know who ended up training the new full-time employee? I did. And all that, it just felt so incredibly unfair, right? It's like, and this makes no sense. Like, I was more experienced, I was more qualified. The only thing is, like, I couldn't give that extra 3-month commitment because of what I felt God might be calling me to do in the future. So at the end of the day, I stayed there. I completed my time there and continued to work there. But we all have those stories, right? We all have those times we've experienced something in life where that just doesn't feel fair. And we don't know what to do with it. We do what the first employees did in the story. They go and they complain. It's like, it's not fair. Like, why did they get paid as much as me? How come they didn't have to do what I did? Why did I have to do all the hard work and they got to do the easy work? Why don't I ever get to do this? Right? We've all said that. We've all felt that at times, right? When we look at ourselves in comparison to those who are working with us, we just feel like it's not fair. But I want you to hear this next part of this. In this story, nobody gets less than what was promised. Not a single person got ripped off in this. And that's really, really important to hear. In a grace-based economy, nobody gets less than what was promised. The owner paid those first workers a fair day's wage. They did not get ripped off. They did not get shortchanged. They did not get swindled at all. They were paid a fair wage. The tension came in when they saw those who were hired later get paid the same thing. That's what flipped things around. That's what turned things upside down. They didn't know what to do with the fact that somebody who worked significantly less than them got paid the same amount of money. But it wasn't because they got ripped off. It wasn't because they weren't paid a fair wage. They were. Everyone got exactly what was promised, or more. Those who were hired first were paid the daily wage. They were paid a fair wage. Those who were hired later were paid what was right in the mind and in the heart of the owner. And that was generous. It was above and beyond. It was more than they could have anticipated or expected. But that's how grace is, right? Grace isn't fair because it's not based on merit or it's not based on value. Because did you notice the one thing that we never saw in any of the story? It never said anything about the quantity or quality of work that any of these employees did. It didn't say that those who went out first worked really, really hard and got a whole bunch done in the work that they did all day long, and those who worked later in the day, they just kind of did the last little cleanup things. There's nothing at all that was said at all about how hard they worked, how much they get done, because it's not based on merit or value. Grace has nothing to do with the amount of good things that you do. It has nothing to do with the kind of person you are. It has nothing to do with character or anything like that. Grace is simply based in the heart of the owner. In this case, the owner of the vineyard. In the bigger picture, grace is based in the heart of God. It has nothing to do with our own value, our own merit, our amount of deeds that we do or don't do, or any of that. It's simply based in the heart and the goodness and kindness of God. And the truth is, we like it when it works for us. But we can struggle when we see it applied to someone else. I mean, we saw that, right? If you were the last person, you would have been thrilled to get that full day's work, full day's pay for an hour's work. But you also would have been frustrated to get the same pay for doing a lot more work. That's the tension we can feel sometimes with grace. We like it when it works in our favor, but we have a hard time knowing what to do with it when we see it benefit somebody else and we feel like it maybe doesn't benefit us as much. But don't forget that everyone is getting exactly what was promised. Nobody's getting ripped off in this story at all. So I think there's a few things that we can remember when we try to live in this way, when we think about how we live in this world that is based on grace, and we think about how all of our relationship with God is really based on grace. And the first thing is simply this, is just to remember that grace isn't based on merit or value, it's based in the goodness and kindness of God. That we remember, like, don't find yourself being in a trap. I have to do all these good things in order for God to love me. I have to do all these good things in order for God to be kind to me. If I just do all this, then maybe then God will show up and do something for me if I just do all of this first. That's not how grace is. Grace is based in the good and kind, generous, loving heart of God. That He looks at us and He loves us just like that landowner decided to be so exceedingly generous to those last workers. That's how God seeks to show up with us. So if we can trust God's heart, if we can believe that God's heart is good and that it's kind, that can free us from the trap of feeling we have to do all these things to try to earn something that we can never earn. But then there's the second thing. Remembering that we're all the last worker getting way more than we deserve. That's, I think, the key to the story. We're all that last worker. Because we remember that we all sin, we all struggle, we all make mistakes, but God loves us anyway. We fall short. We don't get it right. God says, but I love you. I'm still going to be faithful to you. I'm still going to be good to you. I'm still going to be there for you. I'm still going to shower you with goodness and kindness. We can see ourselves at a lot of different places in the story. We can connect to a lot of different experiences in the story, but never forget that we are each that last worker who are getting way more than we could ever possibly earn on our own. And it's because of that generous and good heart of God. And then when we remember that, we can understand that perspective of those last years. We can remember when we experience that goodness and kindness of God in our lives. That's what can then unlock our hearts to be able to love people that way too. To show people that kind of grace, to show people that kind of kindness, to show people that kind of mercy. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to do by turning the story upside down. To encourage us to stop seeing things as so black and white, to stop this race of assigning value and worth to things, and simply seeing this inherent value that all people have as an image bearer of God. That every single person is somebody who is worth being loved. That every single person is somebody who is worth treating with kindness and respect. Not because of anything that they've done, not because of anything of who they are, but because they bear the image of the God who created them. And when we understand our place in this world, we understand that we have been treated with that kind of love and kindness by God, that's what can then unlock our hearts to be able to do that for other people. And it is that kind of action, it's that kind of love that changes lives. And it's that kind of love, it's that kind of mercy that can then begin to change communities and families and all kinds of things. But it doesn't happen easily. So we can always find ourselves slipping back into that trap of comparing ourselves to other people or how we measure up with this or with that. But what would it look like if we begin to model our relationships on grace? What would it look like if we allowed our heart to be more like that owner who just sought just to be generous? Said, I just want to bless people. And yeah, that may be sometimes cause some people some frustration. Well, why would he do that for them and not for them, or for this person and not for that person? But at the end of the day, the more people that we can love in this way, the more that we will end up reflecting the heart of God, and the more I believe that we'll see God do amazing things in our life together. Would you pray with me? God, we just thank you that you love us so generously and so freely. And God, how you desire just to use us to share that love with people. God, and I thank you, God, that you love us so much that there's nothing that you wouldn't do to let us know how loved we are. And God, I pray that we would just never fail to see how much you have blessed us, how much you have loved us, how much you have given to us, God, and that we might then be able to respond with that same kind of generosity to others too, Lord. And God, we just give you thanks that your heart is good, that it's gracious and kind, and that, God, we just pray that our heart might continue to reflect your heart more and more. Let's pray this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. This time we're going to receive our morning tithes and offerings. And also as you do that, there's a black folder that's kind of in the center of each row here. If you can pass